Hey, welcome back to HPE Discover. And the traditional wrap-up to the coffee talks here at HPE Discover is where we do a bit of a roundtable with the bloggers and get a feel of what they've seen and experienced and thought of what the show was. So this is pretty much as things are winding down around us, the people are draining away from the show floor. It's becoming increasingly difficult to get people to sit down and watch the presentations because they're just over the show. It's a long time here. However, there's still plenty of enthusiasm here in the room with the bloggers, and I don't know, where do we start with this? You got something, Richard?
Yeah, I could sit. I've always got something, Alistair. Yeah, what I found encouraging this time is there was less protracted discussion about strategy, vision, mission statement, and all the high-level language that surrounds that, and a lot more discussion about what is now being delivered, what you can order, what you can actually buy.
It's a lot more of the execution than the high-level plan.
Yeah. So we've done that transition, I think, fairly effectively this year to where all the discussions are about execution more than anything else. And the second thing I really took to was that Chris Purcell dragged me over to that augmented reality kind of fun kind of thing. But I think that's probably where we're going to go at some point for education. I mean, no one reads the manuals. Rarely do I find the right YouTube. But boy, if you could entertain me for a while you taught me a new programming language, count me in.
Yeah, I think the augmented reality stuff is interesting because I've worked with other vendors that are also interested in how can we leverage this to, you had mentioned education. How can you learn how to do something through a more fun and interactive way? But it's also trying to bring back some of those aspects that maybe we don't actually look at anymore. You know, how often do you need to go and tell somebody, here's how you rack and stack something?
Yeah.
You know, how often does somebody actually experience that rack and stack anymore? Because so much of the stuff is going into the cloud. You know, as was mentioned earlier today in one of the breakfasts, it was, well, the cloud is just somebody else's data center. It's another set of servers somewhere else. It's just not necessarily yours. So as a person that's working with server administration and server management, if you don't do that racking and stacking anymore, you lose the physical layer troubleshooting aspect of it. Is just looking at a LED that says connection status or blinky lights. So much of that is lost on today's administrators because they don't physically see their boxes.
Yep.
So if we can use augmented reality to help people go back to that, what I would consider extreme basics that we don't have anymore, and help them understand, yes, here's what it's like to cable up gear. Here's what it's like to actually cross-connect through different patch panels and worry about things like loss, depending on what type of connectors you are, by going through and joining different connectors. And this panel goes to this place. I think there's a huge opportunity for AR to kind of fill that need for layer one.
I completely understand that. In 1999, I racked up all my home theater equipment, right? Which, you know, with Ethernet connections, I put it up. Okay, I disassembled it. I've moved into a new home, and I stared at the boxes. I have no idea how to plug them all together anymore. You know, and I sympathise with the guys that have this as a job, but they don't get hands-on anymore. So the augmented reality, I suspect, would be a great aid for them.
Yeah.
Now, Jeffrey, being the production professional that he is, has reminded me that I've failed to do any introductions and get you guys to do introductions as well. Too much enthusiasm for starting your talking, and then we can never stop you. So I'm Alistair Cook. I'm Nemitas NZ on Twitter, or NZ, and very involved in the V Brown Bag podcast and all things free education around data center. Richard.
Yeah, I am a blogger, and I focus on Hewlett-Packard's mission-critical systems with particular interest in the non-stop systems and now the virtualized non-stop systems.
And going in the speaking order.
Blake Croney, wireless engineer, architect, trainer. Find me on Twitter at Blake Croney, and I try to look at every single product solution out there from a vendor-neutral aspect of it and educate the masses is my goal.
And while we're heading in that direction, we'll go with Carrie Ann as well.
Just go totally to the edge.
You do need to turn your microphone on.
So, where
Oh, you're good.
There it is. Oh, okay. Well, I'm the guy on the edge anyway. I'm Gary Minchell. I blog at the Manufacturing Connection, and I write about industrial production, manufacturing, and I'm here investigating Internet of Things, the whole IoT stuff, and the edge stuff, and all that kind of weird stuff.
And I'm Keith Parsons. I do Wi-Fi. So I run another conference called Wireless LAN Professionals Conference, blog at Wireless LAN Professionals, and Twitter is Keith R. Parsons.
So we've got data center. Come on in a little more, Keith, so we can get you into the shot without turning the camera completely around. So we have data center infrastructure, we have network connectivity infrastructure, and we have the thing on the end that we all want to get our data from as well. So we've got fairly good coverage of the top topics that were at this conference.
Well, I had a topic I wanted to talk about. It was like not in my wheelhouse at all. I attended a quantum computing session, which rocked my world. Yeah. It was like so far above my what I understood. Very cool stuff. And pun intended. Super cool stuff. That's going to change our world. Maybe not even in my lifetime, but it's fun every now and then to step out of where we are and what we see and look at what the researchers and the senior fellows are doing. And it was a fantastic session.
That was absolutely a highlight for me because I did the fireside chat with Ray Basaliel, and what you didn't get was some of the really cool stuff he talked with me about in the briefing, that he had started doing some work on quantum computing at room temperature using diamonds to get away from being that sub-zero, trying to get as close to absolute zero for the superconducting quantum computers. And his conclusion was that wasn't going to be something that was going to be happening in probably his lifetime to get it up to room temperature. And that was why he had moved away from quantum as a general purpose computing thing and was viewing it as an accelerator for specific tasks rather than as general purpose, and that this in-memory that HPE has been following, that it doesn't require technology that is so different from what we already have, is the real-world practical solution for business problems. But yeah, that was a fabulously interesting session.
That accelerator idea that if you have a specific need, and it's, again, like you said, it's not for Excel, but if you have a very specific need that fits that, some of the processing power was just staggering what it could do even today, let alone where it's going to be.
Shortly after that, I was at that presentation too. I have no idea what they're talking about most of the time, but I enjoy the heck out of it. But what really caught my attention was about 2 hours later, there was a panel session on the machine, AI, and all this kind of stuff. And they threw up, a Silicon Graphics guy threw up a comparison of where they were 5 or 6 years ago. And then they threw up a picture of the machine, and the schematics look kind of the same. That's okay, but on the machine schematic that came out 3 years ago, there was an element at the very bottom plugged in to the memory-centric model, and it said quantum. And that caught my eye, so I took a picture of that. So even back then, two years ago, when they were talking about the machine, there was a placeholder, for an accelerator or something already plugged into their diagrams of the machine.
So, Gary, what's been really cool in this conference for you? What things have stood out?
Well, of course, there was an announcement about the new Edgeline things, and I've gone all the way from very small devices on the edge, collecting some data and sending it off, to PC-type things, and then you take enterprise-class compute power, and the new Edgeline family includes a storage module that goes up to 48 TB rather than G, which is what we usually play with in manufacturing. And I had an opportunity to talk not only with HPE people, customers, potential partners, all kinds of things, and a lot of people are very interested in HPE's play in that area. And what really was interesting was the CTO of Murphy Oil, who talked about putting these things on an offshore oil rig, and that's a very mission critical, crucial thing, and it's got to be really good, and it shows the power. So that was all pretty interesting.
And that's delivering on that idea of putting the whole data center out where the data is being generated and not requiring a special space for it. It's the micro data center that can be right out close, low latency connection, very fast response, but very intelligent response at the system that's under control, be it an oil rig, or we'll have the refinery of the future guys from Texmark talking again about what they're doing.
Alistair, I just want to compliment you. You did that last whole paragraph, and you did not use the word edge. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So is that going to be the new drinking game? We definitely have edge as one of the things on the drinking game cards.
We would all be under the table if that was the case.
Yeah.
In that case, we'll just have to have bingo cards and work out what the prize is.
I thought I was supposed to use edge.
Yeah.
We don't use that term in the industrial world, but
Yeah, but as far as we're concerned, everything that you care about is the edge, because it's outside of our data center and it's not in the cloud, and that's everything else is the edge.
that's exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
we feed the cloud. Yeah.
And I think one of the things too that came across just based on what Gary said is, haven't we become numb to just how big things are? You know, you just said 48 terabytes, and there's someone else talking about processors with 96 terabytes and things like this. It was only a few years ago when you said gigabytes was meaningful. And, you know, back, I'm not going to go back too far, but, you know, when disks still spun around and we could remove them, we were pleased when we went to 7 megabytes on a disk, you know. And what that numbness has done is, for some of us, I think we don't have the perceptions and things of what you can actually do with all of that memory. And I think there's, talking to some of the younger generation, the kids around here, they just view that, yeah, well, everything has unlimited memory. We'll just write stuff. Right?
Well,
But-
some of the numbers they came up with from self-driving cars, the amount on a daily basis that one individual car is producing, you have to have those sizes. And all of the big data plays and all of the machine learning, the size of those data sets are just literally unlimited. We can never have enough.
And as the networking guy, that must start to terrify you, because we want to transfer these things across the parts of the network that traditionally have been the most congested and the most worryingly limited on capacity, particularly because we pay every month for every megabyte per second of WAN link.
And those are all wireless. We don't even have the beauty of having a bounded media. So specifically the cars, a lot of the IoT is going to be all wireless as well. And it's we need to have some changes in the way that works.
But I also think there's a conversation to be had about the value of that data, and I think about this edge to cloud, hybrid cloud, as being also a refinery, that we're pushing compute out to where the data is generated, partly because it's too damn expensive to move a petabyte an hour of data back into the data center to analyze it. That the actual value can be condensed. You can pull away all of the chaff and just send the wheat back.
But think of the amount of training it takes to learn to know what are those pieces.
This absolutely, and we had one of the discussions in the Future Now sessions that we had on Monday night, was it? Was about how teaching AI systems has to change, and the ability to update those models out down to the end devices has to change, because it is very intrusive to push new models down to the end. Maybe it was
and
an AI
expensive
session.
both in compute time and size, but time. Months of learning, and how often can you repeat that?
And that's where some of the possibilities for the quantum come in, is to accelerate that learning process, and also for the dot product engine using Memristor that we heard last year about from the labs team, to be able to do the matrix multiply that's an inherent part of teaching a neural network, and to do that very efficiently.
And you'd mentioned the network side pushing those petabytes around, but it also is inside the CPUs and the whole memory. We're going to compute in memory rather than even push it from the CPU over to memory. It has to be local.
Yeah, and we're really waiting on more of the persistent, that we can have a single source of truth that is both used as compute but also as the protected store. The current models where RAM is transient and that we have to push out to an SSD or to a spinning disk in order to persist. That paradigm of shifting that everything stays in one place and everything is processed at RAM speed is still taking a little while. The scalable persistent memory that's in the Reliance is an interesting step in that.
When you think of vehicle to manufacturer, vehicle to insurance, vehicle to regulator, vehicle to vehicle, and then vehicle to city, when you think of all of that that's going to obviously start to come, you can only do it with real memory in the car. You couldn't try and start paging things out and writing things out and then pulling them back. So that means the car's memory is going to be enormous as well. So,
yeah, it's similar to what we do in manufacturing, and it's the same deal, the latency. So much has to happen right there where the action is, and then batch send stuff out to the data center for further analysis. And some of the predictive, in our area, there's been a lot of talk here about predictive analytics, and I know what it means for us, predicting when a pump motor might go down or a pump or something like that. But we're looking ahead into prescriptive, which takes more modeling, more AI, more of that stuff, and then eventually self-healing, where there's enough sensors that says, hey, something's wrong, but I'm going to do this, and Linda from TechSmart was great on that. What if I had enough sensors that I could put all of my pumps in my whole refinery in a system, and they could talk to each other, and one says, hey, I'm going out of balance, but if I correct myself, it screws up everybody else in the chain. And,
right. I can stay in balance, but only if I deliver a lower volume. And how can we still achieve our recipe with that lower volume?
Yeah, some of that, when I was listening to them talk this morning about the refinery of the future, I was really tempted to ask the question, is this a double-edged sword? Because you think about what type of products that they're creating. They're creating volatile gases, they're creating explosive liquids, and now we're bringing all these compute devices, access points, switches, etc., everything into there, and there was even discussions about how much can we try to leverage machine learning and AI to increase safety by taking human elements out of it. But at the same time, I'm looking at this as saying, this is one of those markets where
it's scary.
You almost don't want to take the human elements out of it.
We talk about, you make a mistake and things go boom.
Yes.
So and this is the literal
but
things go boom.
And there's a piece in there where what we call artificial intelligence is actually still incredibly stupid. That if the model says do the wrong thing, then the system will continue to do the wrong thing when a human would say that's just stupid.
Right. So
but one of the things I loved was the look on Linda's face when they said, if we need to train it to recognize an overfill situation, maybe we should overfill some tanks.
Yes.
And it was no.
It's like, no, we're not going to do that. So I wonder about that, because I look at everything as how we're becoming so resilient on devices, and we as humans, because what is everybody focused on? Everybody focuses on how many billions of connected devices are going to be present over the next few years. Right. But what we're not focusing ever on is, what is that doing to humanity? What is that doing to the human elements of everything? Because we're abstracting all that out and saying, okay, tell me to eat. Okay, you told me to eat. Tell me to go to the bathroom. Okay, you told me to go to the bathroom. It's like, is it going to get to the point where this little thing controls every aspect of it, and there's no longer even that level one, that layer one trait skill worker that just knows, yes, I turn this knob and it fills a tanker, and when I turn it off, it stops because I know the thing is getting full.
Actually, what we miss is the worker that could go into a refinery and smell and go, oh, something's wrong over there. It doesn't, or right. I listen and I hear the wrong kind of hum, or I could put my hand on a motor and that sort of domain expertise. And you probably get that in other areas too.
Yeah, what we normally call intuition. That is, in fact, a learnt understanding of the underlying system, and that's what's missing from what we call AI at the moment. It's not actually intelligent.
Street smarts versus book smarts.
Yeah.
And that kind of, you take that storyline, and then you look at what they're pioneering now with massive container ships that are totally automated and not manned. And we just saw off Australia 83 containers of diapers go into the ocean, right? And that was with human control. If it was a completely automated, this thing would have plowed it straight into the sea and lost all the containers. And, you know, we're not quite at the level of modeling yet where we have enough data to figure out what's happening at sea. But they're going to try and bring in and start testing across the Atlantic very soon, you know, completely automated ships, so that they don't need the crew anymore. They don't put people in danger on the ships. But heaven help the rest of us who just happen to be sailing nearby. You know.
So there'll be nobody to be taken hostage by the Somali pirates.
They just take all the containers.
So I think we've sort of thrashed through some of the AI and machine learning and different ways of computing. While I've got two wireless guys with me in a world that is completely not mine, and networking guys, what did you see from the networking side of the conference here and the things that were talked about?
Actually, I was a little disappointed. There's this little teeny orange in the sea of green. Having attended Aruba Atmosphere, where it's all, you know, and there's a little part about switching, but it's all wireless. It was, I would say refreshing, because it's a whole different thing, but it was actually a little disappointing because my world is wireless, and here I found I'm just one little cog in a big system.
Welcome to the world of enterprise IT.
Well, and I got a little excited this morning at breakfast because, you know, we started going down the conversation of the refinery of the future, and part of that discussion point was wireless plays a big role in it for proof of concepts, and wireless plays a big role in it for just overall deployment, because we don't have to run cables. And when they started talking about that it costs $7,000 to run a cable because of all the conduit that's needed for sticking within the hazmat requirements and everything, I was like, okay, this is cool, we're doing wireless. And then as I start actually talking the wireless, I'm just like, who designed this? I mean, 6 stories up to get outside of the explosive range.
Of the explosive range, yeah.
It's like, and you're wondering why you're having to augment with LT double. It seemed to me as like, again, like I echo Keith's statement, is that, you know, there's this little tiny orange section over there and this big section of green, and wireless is the transport medium of IoT for the most part.
It's actually the access layer for just about every device.
There's so much that rides on wireless. I was really surprised that there wasn't more discussion around how do we properly deploy and design these networks, because as wireless engineers, our biggest issue that we have is the fact that it's, well, how hard is it to run wires, not run wires? I went to Best Buy or Fry's or wherever, and I bought an access point. I set it up in my house. I mean, by golly, you should be able to do this with like 2 APs and you're done.
Well, the thing I get all the time is any architect out there will use a structural engineer. They'll use an acoustic engineer for the sound. They'll use
lighting
engineers. Every single piece of this entire facility, there's AV engineers who've done it. And then as an afterthought, some wired networking guy goes, oh, we'll throw some APs up. There's an entire engineering discipline behind wireless that's getting overlooked, and so thus we're the little bastard redheaded stepchild someplace.
For some, so we've been doing wireless sensor networks for a while now in manufacturing, and using I forget my IEEE numbers right at the moment, but
like Zigbee or something.
Well, yeah, that's it. IEEE 802.15 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't prepared to talk about that. But anyway, I've been through some things where they've actually laid out much more complex systems with a lot of sensors talking directly with each other and back and hopping and all that. So some of what you're talking about exists, and it wasn't until this morning's discussion where the HPE person started talking a little bit about that I thought, oh, I haven't delved enough into that use case. And so you brought it out exactly right. Actually, there's usually a lot of engineering that goes into all that. You can do it in Class 1 Div 2, Class 1 Div 1.
Yep.
And so it deserves more of a discussion maybe than we got. You're exactly right.
They talked a bit more about the wireless last year when they first introduced Refinery of the Future, and they definitely viewed that wireless network as being a core infrastructure they needed in place beforehand. And as you know, all design is a series of compromises, and it's ends up being the engineer finding the best set of compromises produces the best design. So it's a little difficult to judge from a distance of how they've chosen to judge it. But I agree, there is huge domain expertise in getting RF right in the same way there is in getting audio right. And that was glossed over in today's discussion.
Yeah. It was a very, very quick brief, and it was kind of like, I kind of want to poke at this. I kind of want to.
But I don't think they had the person here who could have responded to the poking.
Not to mention we only had about 20 minutes for the whole thing, so.
But yeah, no, it's. I mean, the only other, the other aspect of it obviously is Aruba's announcement around SD-WAN. Part of me, as if you watched the session yesterday on the SD-WAN, I kind of hit into him a little bit about what's new.
It's SD branch.
Well, SD branch, sorry. Thank you for correcting me. Boy. Woo, train. It's all about, is this really anything that's new, or is this just a rebranding of components that we've already had, and just maybe a slight spin on it?
There are some improvements in those components.
And that's the thing is
and
that
the
you're looking
grouping
at.
of them, I don't know if it's like revolutionary. It's an evolution with a new name on it.
Which is the way that most technology things have been going lately. There's not a whole lot that is revolutionary. It's just we have naturally progressed into this next layer of doing things that maybe people were doing manually, but now we're going to do it through an automated process, so it's software defined.
Another one that we saw this morning, speaking of wireless, was HPE has a 60 gigahertz solution. Aruba has a 60 gigahertz solution, and neither of them knew about each other. So some more interfacing is in order.
Yeah.
And that was something I felt from my perspective on the end of the Aruba discussion was around that Aruba is operated very much separately from HPE, and I think there could be a lot more value by those being a much more integrated view from the management perspective as well as clearly from the actual technology underneath.
On the positive note, Aruba is still here, and Colubris is not.
Many acquisitions ago.
Yeah, so there has been a tendency as HP picks up more wireless acquisitions, they get sucked up and disappear. And it's been a couple years now, and Aruba's hanging in there. Then there is orange on the floor, so I shouldn't complain that it's small, but it's still there.
Yeah, and I think, Alistair, you are kind of correct in that mom and dad and stepkids, everybody should talk a little bit more and try to be a little bit more cohesive. But at the same time, I think how they positioned it post-acquisition is actually pretty intelligent, because you don't see ProCurve switches. You saw ProCurve switches migrate over into the Aruba portfolio, and features join the set of features from the Aruba OS, and we're starting to see, because our mediums are becoming very converged. The fact that you're connecting wirelessly or wired should be irrelevant. You shouldn't care how you're connected. You should just know, I have connectivity, I have a set of policies applied to me, I can go to XYZ resources. My little sensor, whether it's connected through a wire or wireless, has a set of policies, and it can get to some things. So I think by somewhat, moving that and shifting that over into it, we're hopefully seeing where we're going to have the convergence of all of this access media quicker than if it was big entity trying to talk with a smaller entity and trying to get along. If you just say, okay, you go and you do this, take all of the switching,
All the networking pieces.
take all of the networking pieces, and do your thing with it. And then our boxes, our intelligent edge or our data center boxes are going to all plug into this, and we're going to talk. I think there's a lot of good things that have came out of that by not necessarily trying to put too much red tape on it.
Yeah. As you're talking about ProCurve switches, it just reminded me of another acquisition that I haven't heard about for a long time, 3Com. Have we heard anything about the 3Com product set, or is that exclusively this happens in China and is never seen anywhere else?
Aren't they on the shelf right next to the Colubris?
Just I have grey hair and lack of hair from being a big fan of the 3COM 3C509 network adapters back in the day.
Ah, the 3C509. Yes.
Yeah, one of my favorite podcasts was one where one of the designers of the 3C509 was interviewed on the podcast.
Did you get the autograph on it?
I did not, because I was not the host. This was one of Lauren Malhoit's Adapting IT podcasts, where she interviewed women about their tech contributions to the world. So what else was happening on the show? What else did we hear about? Was there any non-stop news?
Yeah, from a non-stop news perspective, and I talked to Randy Meyer about it this morning, is the fact that it's very deliberate by HPE to throw back up the banner fault tolerant. You know, not fault tolerant had just disappeared off the messaging of non-stop, with the assumption that everyone assumed a non-stop was fault tolerant. But the category of fault tolerance, you know, people understand what that means. And as you get into hybrid IT, and as you get into the effort that HPE did to completely port an instrument, that whole non-stop kernel, so it runs in a virtual machine, you now have the ability to go across different clouds, multiple clouds, with the one OS. So you can now bypass something that fails and just keep the whole application running, and have the option of actually having some aspects of it on a private cloud, some aspects of it in a public cloud, and some aspects of it on your own hardware. So it's really transitioned that fault tolerance into something more akin to what you could actually use in this hybrid IT, and not just relegate it to some box, some data PABX out the back of the office somewhere that nobody knew anything about. And then the effort that they've gone into with the languages, Perl and all this kind of modern stuff, what they've done is a very good approach of shielding that you're running on a non-stop. You just develop stuff. You develop it in Java, you develop whatever, and then when whoever's executing it has said, do you need a certain availability policy? Yeah, I want it to run all the time. I don't want it to come down. So now you can do that. And the first tests are all going out this year, and the big market for it appears to be in the telco space. The telcos have jumped on this, and the first prototypes are the really big telcos. So yeah, a lot has changed on non-stop. It's not a box anymore. It's a bunch of software.
A big bucket of Python glue.
Gee, somebody might own that domain.
Hey, Jeffrey, did you have something to add to us, to give your impressions of what you've seen?
I kind of saw this room. That's pretty much it. So. No, I did lots of cool stuff. We had a lot of great speakers here. Let me flip over to me here. I guess one question I have for you guys is, do you now understand what Green Lake is?
We continue to have a green lake in the centre of the North Island of New Zealand, quite close to the Blue Lake. Very sacred lakes that are surrounded by volcanoes in close to where I live in New Zealand. I understand that completely.
There's another Green Lake up in Seattle.
Well, there's one in Wisconsin.
Well, obviously it's succeeding.
It's succeeding.
So
Clearly
have
we
global
got
green
bodies of
lakes.
waters down.
Yeah, I think they've got some work to do on this Green Lake. We were just having a chat. Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it a service marketed under a product ID? I mean, it's very much in its infancy, and I think they, just by the fact that they got relaxing chairs and things around that Green Lake stuff, I think is indication that there's much more to come, and that it's just, very much in its infancy. But I went and asked people, and I got some stock answers, but they made not a whole lot of impression on me.
Nicely played there. Nicely played.
Well, I try. Okay, I gotta keep the panel going there. So, and speaking of which, let's go on to the next question. What do you guys think of the Plexi integration, and do you think it's going to go anywhere?
So Plexi is really interesting. I attended a tech field day event at Plexi a little while ago. Learned about their products, taken other briefings from them. So they originally started with a silicon photonics methodology where they were using 10 gig optical connections and switching those optical connections to guarantee bandwidth between points. They then realized that the prices were never going to come down on those, and so they then program switches to do the same traffic steering and guaranteeing of bandwidth to different functions. I was looking back at an article I wrote in 2015 about combining Plexi with a hyperconverged solution to hyperconverge the actual networking. And it was specifically, Plexi was what was called. That was before I knew anything about the company. It's really interesting to see the idea of simplified management of network being integrated with your hyperconverged, because the reality of the value of hyperconverged is it's about simplified management, not necessarily about eliminating the storage network or putting your storage inside the same servers as your compute. It's about simplified management. So the track of integrating that simplified management of the networking into simplified management of the compute and storage platforms is really interesting. But I bet that my networking colleagues have some thoughts about handing over control of the network to the virtualization team.
It's just like anything else, is when we ask for a VM to host any one of our many single pane of glass management applications that we have that we need to run. It's, you're going to somebody and you're requesting it. I think it's about the relationship that you have to build with them and make sure that everybody understands it. And unfortunately, in our industry, there's times that our heads get in our way, and yeah, it's the whole thing. Well, you're the blame. Who's to blame of what's going on to it? And I'm not necessarily opposed to handing over control per se, if it's the right solution for it. And I think that's the key, is that we all have to know and understand what is the desired outcome of the actions that we're doing.
I think that part of it is our desired outcome from the domains we're not expert in is make this VM do this thing I want it to do. And from the other side is make the network do the thing I want it to do. Without having the domain expertise, it's something else. And whenever you give that something else to someone else, that's the issue. That's the handoff, is saying I want to hand off something to you, and I expect something in return without really knowing how to do it.
And the objective here is to provide the transparency in there, so that as far as I'm concerned, if I've got a virtual machine that needs to be on a different host to the one it currently lives on, I don't want to have to file a series of change controls to get the network team to update the policy set to allow that network to exist on a different host.
Right.
But I don't want to have to set those policies up at all. I just want to be able to say this VM has to go from this host to this host, and the network underneath should follow.
Right.
And I think you have a similar vision of not wanting me to log hundreds of change controls for you to update networking. You want to set some policies around objects connected to my network should be treated in this way. And you don't want to have, that's the point at which you want to hand off. You want to hand off policy to me. I want to be consuming that policy and just operating within it. And that's where I see that simplified network management being really valuable.
Yeah, the orchestration is really, really key to it. I was sitting in a briefing last week, and they're talking about for a large, I think it was a large banking organization, and they needed to add one line to an ACL. Just one line. And it was some ungodly 6 or 7 weeks.
Yeah. Lead time.
That's a high criticality
of
change.
Trying to come up with a change window that works across
and we
all
haven't
the
even
locations.
added the security layer.
No, and it's just, I think you're right, is that the orchestration and us moving towards trying to not necessarily fully automate things, but just orchestrate things better is really crucial for us to keep the hair for those of us that have the hair, and not be going too crazy trying to figure out how can I organize this across everybody.
But I think one of the underlying, I think there's a wider view, right? ACLs were a nightmare because they're essentially a consolidated text file that holds a whole heap of unrelated policies in one place. And I think if we go back to the sorts of things that I'm blanking on his name, a gentleman from Chef that we had yesterday at breakfast, at lunch.
The Ryder Cup CTO.
No. In here we had...
from the SD branch.
No, we had a guy from Chef actually in here, and I'm blanking on his name, Jeffrey. The whole idea with Chef and with declarative configurations is that
Adam Jacob
was in here. He was one of the founders of Chef, and the idea that you specify some policies and it's a case of just make it so, rather than having the traditional networking nightmare is I have configuration across 150 switches and I need to coordinate those as a series of damn text files. which is the way historically networks were managed. This is why software-defined networking is so critical, but it needs to be done in a way that allows us to have a set of policies and to change individual policies without unexpected flow-on that we get when we make changes to ACLs.
Yes. Agreed.
You would retain your hair, and maybe I would still have some hair if that was the case, although my hair loss is entirely genetic. Jeffrey's going to restart us with another
I guess I'll
question.
chime in. Yeah, get you guys started. So, of course, we didn't have HPE Labs come in here for Blogger Day, but my understanding is they had a really interesting Lego exhibit, and there was a reason why. Did you guys visit that and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I visited it. I still didn't understand what it was trying to depict. I don't know who I was talking to, and they just started to talk about the fun they had assembling it. Did anyone find out what the sim?
I looked at it to see, I have that set, I have that set, I have that set, I have that.
Yeah,
It was more of the shopping list, but
Yeah.
I think it was an interesting. I was looking over some of the things that they had. And I think it was an interesting concept of trying to piece together to show you how, much like building anything else, we're talking about building compute modules or building modules and putting. If you put this brick here, if you put this brick in this order, what's going to happen to the flow? You know, how does this change things by just switching one little brick and changing could completely change an entire outcome.
Right. What I found a little bit more interesting, and Gary, you may have seen it too, was when they mounted a very high-resolution camera above a manufacturing process, and as that process, and it was like a giant motherboard, if I can still use that word, and it was able to read all the UPS codes, all the serial numbers and everything, but what it did is for every single device on that thing, it checked to see if it had been installed properly and cables plugged and seated. But if it was all okay, it was then adding blocks into a blockchain in every dimension possible, so that everything ever made with that particular was chained in blocks, so that if Intel came running in and said, I got a floating point error in some of these chips, which boxes went out with these chips? Bang, they had the answer. And so I saw the marriage of the process of ensuring everything was done right and the process of recording everything that's on that board. Rather interesting from that perspective, that you could troubleshoot it at some future point.
Oh, I didn't see that here, but I saw it in Hanover, and so
Yeah,
I didn't make it over to that section.
I can't
Yeah,
drive
so
to
it can read the 2D barcode.
Yeah.
And pull up a bill of materials.
Yeah.
And then so it knows what it's supposed to see, and then I used to do vision system integration, so when I saw that, my heart just started throbbing. Yeah, it's a great application of data and basic manufacturing and quality assurance and the whole thing. It's a really good example.
Coming at a time where, I think it's Gartner says there's like gazillions of blockchain projects, of which 80%, 90% will never see the light of day, and we're inventing all these really strange things to use it for. It was good to see something of a practical nature that to me made perfect sense for using something that's immutable, that you can't change. That's what it is. So that when you can go in, it's an absolute list that you get, whatever you get of all the requisite. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's traceable and you can't change it.
No.
So you could follow the whole chain down. In manufacturing food, for example, we need to trace it from the field or the cow to whatever. So yeah, it's good.
So we've got a new blogger joining us now, so I'll just hand over to Jean and get you to introduce yourself, and you wanted to talk about something as well.
Exactly. So Jean Bosman, I'm with Hurwitz and Associates, and it's my first outing as a part of the blogger group. It's very exciting. I went around one more time through the exhibit floor. And I did speak with the HP Lab folks about a number of things, but one thing that was particularly intriguing, I think, was how they're making the move to more photonics for interconnects. And they were showing it on the Superdome Flex, or the Flex Superdome, so quite a big machine with a lot of scalable memory, but to have as well at the back of it the the substitution of photonics is much, much faster. So you've eliminated hops by having the scalable memory, and now you're speeding up I/O. So for large data sets, this is a pretty good combination. They were showing it interfacing with a standard FPGA, so that allows you to take a more standard piece of hardware and then take advantage. But there were some things that were showing that they're working on, and some things that really looked like they could take off in the next year or so, and that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that comes back to what my opening remark here. When I ran around that, so much as stuff that could go into the market or is just on the edge of going into the market, right? And about to as distinct, yeah. But yeah, I think that's the thing that really impressed me the most with this whole show, is the fact that even with the most advanced stuff that they were showing, it's really close or it is already shipping. And I think that's a change from previous shows. And I think it fundamentally should encourage, both the customers and prospects of HPE, that, for crying out loud, they seem to be on the right track.
Yeah, and the piece of the machine that we can get now is that scalable memory on the Superdome to actually use the compute model that HPE has been developing around the machine. You can use it today, not for production yet, but presumably that's just a matter of some confidence in turning on the support, but that it's actually delivering. And I think that, again, is that execution.
Just want to add some of the use cases they were showing for it. So one is HPC, that was loud and clear. But as well, they showed SQL Server, they showed Oracle, and they showed SAP HANA. That was a natural, but very real enterprise workloads.
Yeah, whereas the other things they've shown in the past have been genomic sequencing, which I don't know about you, but that's not part of any of my customers' business.
Yeah.
Jean, was there anything else you saw on the show that was interesting?
I saw so many things. It's amazing. They were in various stages of, I looked at the IoT Edge stuff. That was really cool. And they had, speaking of Legos, they had a little sort of pretend factory. It was made out of little Lego-like pieces. And they showed it operating with like an actual product. I think it's called the ES1000 or something. It's like an actual edge appliance, but they were showing a use case scenario that was a little forward-looking. Also, this morning we had a session about how the IoT edge stuff is actually being used today at an oil and gas company. So, did you want to comment on that?
Oh, no,
yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
you already did. Sorry.
Well, speak to us good.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. So obviously, not only does HPE have equipment that they're selling today, but they're looking at other use cases. And the nice thing about that one was they were talking about using wireless instead of wired. Did you already went into that? So what it meant was they didn't have to retrofit the entire place to get that benefit. So that was cool. And what else did I want to talk about? I looked a bit at blockchain. I'm not a blockchain expert, but they showed it used with the nonstop SQL MX database. I thought that was just interesting all by itself, right?
Yeah, they're fairly well advanced into that area with respect to financial services and in the banks and things where there's such a stronghold of the nonstop. And what they're doing there is the first thing that seems to be coming first cab off the rank, if you like, is this massive know your customer. And there's a bank that they're working with, or one of their vendors is working with a company called Omni Payments, and they're working with them because they got 4 million cards out there, and they really don't know who those people are. They haven't gone back and checked credentials or anything. And so now there's this, and even if they said to me, if I do 1,000 a week and I validate, I got 4,000 weeks to go. So we got to figure out some other way of doing that. So the blockchain on the nonstop. But the nice thing about that too, just in closing, the people marketing it, the whole team is talking about the blockchain application and talking about it on SQL, and they're completely downplaying the nonstop. They're saying it's a resilient because they want to focus on the blockchain and to a lesser extent,
Yeah, the
the
software
platform.
environment.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think you're right.
But-
Financial is a tremendous
Oh, yeah.
opportunity to take what is their existing customer base
Yeah,
and move them into some new technology.
In the blockchain technology, there's different variations, but this is based on proof of authentication, which is a notary kind of thing. So the concept of having the notary service node on a nonstop is really important, because if you lose the notary, you're out of the loop. You can't do anything. If there's any reason it goes down, you can't confirm the credentials. So it just seemed natural to put on something like that.
It's interesting about blockchain, which is not my area of expertise either, but I interviewed an HPE person in Hanover. I've only had 3 associations with HPE: Madrid, Hanover, and here. So, but anyway, and then you're talking about things they're actually working on, and I've been other places where they're saying either someday we might use it, or I'm not really sure it's got any real use. And one of the HPE people in one of the sessions I was at talked about something about, his little self-promoting piece, but, leaders talk in the present tense and other people talk in the future tense. And like you were saying, Richard, there's a lot of present tense
Yeah, there is.
stuff.
And I think you've got to understand that blockchain brings some value, but at the end of the day, the database really addresses, just having a good database manager, it's SQL kind of thing, it'll do a lot of work. Don't think of it as replacing it. The whole concept is to get rid of intermediaries so that everyone can, you can act. And if you don't have a need to get rid of an intermediary, if you put a database in, for crying out loud. So a lot of the things that have fallen apart are people that have over-engineered something, and then someone's come along and said, I'm already doing that,
Okay, we're running out of time here. So what I'd like to do is just go around and ask you guys to tell our audience what you're looking for, what you hope to get from HPE before the Madrid Discover in 6 months. And can I start with you, Keith?
I can put it down into 4 letters. CBRS. Basically, moving into a new frequency that will allow us to do kind of a hybrid between Wi-Fi and LTE, like a private LTE. It's a place we're going in Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is not a terribly efficient user of spectrum. LTE is a very efficient user of spectrum, but it also, you pay per kilobyte, and Wi-Fi is free. We're trying to find some hybrid in between that allow us to do more things.
Yeah, and Aruba hasn't announced where they're going with that just yet.
That's why you said 6 months? They got 6 months to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping by the time Madrid that we'll see the first real production usage of the virtualized nonstop. Virtualized nonstop came out on OpenStack KVM and everyone just yawned. But they've just finished doing it all on VMware, and evidently there is a European telco that's got it up and running. That's the rumor that's going around, and I can't get any evidence to support that because they won't tell me, being a blogger. So I'm hoping when we get Madrid, all those lines come together and we might find some more.
Yeah, I have to say that having gone to quite a few conferences in the last month and a half, that there are certain themes that one sees, and one of them is about consumability, which I think we heard about here.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to have great technology, but it's going to be very important, I think you got it, that not only to talk about blockchain, not only to talk about optical or whatever, but to see how it really gets woven into actual solutions and real use cases. And what I'm looking for is just more examples of how this new stuff, particularly, well, for me, the Flex Super, I'd like to see who's using that capability, but it does make the point that not only is there a headline around, scalable memory, but where is it really most usable for companies?
And I've been hearing a lot about cultural change within HPE with the transition of CEO, and so I'm interested in seeing how that continues to play out, and as we see it turn out new products and new focuses and particularly new engagements between HPE and its consumers and the wider community here.
I guess for mine, I'd kind of like to see the true single SKU SD branch solution. So as opposed to it being there's all these components and all these components. I really truly want to see. Okay, you purchase this SKU, you go here, activate, and boom, the cloud does what it's magically supposed to do, and automation happens, and the magic pixel fairy dust comes out there, and here's your clear path, here's your central, here's everything that is turned up, and okay, now go out and have your SD branch fun.
So what you're saying is when you do put all this assembled together, it does go boom. Yeah.
It's raining data.
I want to be wowed.
Yeah.
And I hope it doesn't cause any booms. So, speaking as a refinery guy, but
Booms a bit.
yeah, you wouldn't have caught that, Gene. But I guess I'm just looking for more use cases, developing more with the enhanced Edgeline devices.
And Jeff, what about you? What you want to give us your thoughts for next year and just take it all home?
Yeah, well, I actually kind of I was going to ask the question what you guys thought of this Discover. Thumbs up, thumbs down, what thumbs in the middle? Where do you guys stand on that? Let's do a thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle.
Who wants to get invited back again next year? That means
No,
that
nobody
it's all
wants
going to be
do that?
thumbs
You
up.
want to be invited back? Okay, get it now, so.
We should also be saying thank you very much to our hosts.
Yes, we will, and
thank you,
we'll-
Becca and Laura.
Definitely to Becca and Laura. I won't put you on camera because I know you don't want to. And of course, everybody behind the scenes that we have that I don't have their names right now. So thank you guys very much. Of course, it's been an amazing time. We had some great panels. The one thing on these coffee talks that I always strive for is continuity, keeping going, not having breaks in the middle. And we had just a kick, but 3 days worth of content, and you guys helped it along as we went through. Alistair and I finally got to walk around the session, around the hall. It's a smaller hall, but it has a little bit more life to it now. We were just over at the HPE Dev area, and speaking of change of guard in CEOs, we saw just a bunch of stuff just by walking the hall that we wouldn't have seen last year. And it's not a good or bad thing. It's just something that's very noticeable. Even last night with One Republic, Antonio, he introduced One Republic, and then he went down in the crowd and watched the band with us, not in some booth somewhere up in our VIP section or anything like that. So it was amazing to see that change of pace a little bit, and we'll see how that all goes. And as of course with the products, is still not 100% of what GreenLake is. I can't wait to see how Plexi adds into it, as well as all the other stuff. How OneSphere is going to develop in the next year. Let's see how Nimble Storage is going to start working with everything else and coming in. We were talking about. Would you get a SimpliVity box or would you get a Nimble storage box? And the reality is, what do you need it for? Do you need it for the storage, or do you need it for the computing power that's with the storage? So, just all these little components that are needed, but not by everybody. So it's a solution for everybody. So. With that, I want to thank, like I said, thank Becca, thank Laura, thank you guys. Give yourselves a round of applause. If it wasn't for this, you guys wouldn't be, we wouldn't be doing this. So the golf claps are very appropriate. So. And of course, we got Tim, we got Luigi, we got Matt here, and Jim back there, who's just rocking away on his phone. So, and of course, thanks for everybody that came on to the live stream over on Geekazine Live and all the channels, the Twitch channel. We had one question come from the Twitch channel. Go figure. So, yeah, I guess, shall we do this again in Madrid? Sure. Okay.
I like Madrid. Let's do
I like
that.
Madrid too. So thank you guys very much. You guys geek out. We'll see you next year for successful HPE Discovery. Remember the hashtag HPE Discover, and take care.